Protection. The White House press secretary seems confused, though he's the one holding court on this October 1982 day. A reporter asks Press Secretary Larry Speaks, "Does the president have any reaction to the announcement the Center of Disease Control in Atlanta has that AIDS is now an epidemic and has over 600 cases?" "What's AIDS?" Speaks asks. "Over a third of them have died. It's known as the gay plague," the reporter says. The group laughs. "No, it is. I mean, it is a pretty serious thing that 1 in every 3 people that gets it has died. And I wonder if the president is aware of it." "I don't have it," Speaks says. "Do you?" Laughter fills the room, and the question disappears into oblivion. 635 Americans had been stricken with AIDS by October 5, 1982. Of these, 260 were dead. Randy Schultz later wrote in And the Band Played On. There was no rush to spend money, mobilize public health officials, or issue regulations that might save lives. 4 years later, President Ronald Reagan would go on live TV to discuss the so-called gay plague. Addressing Congress about the disease now known as acquired immunity deficiency syndrome, he said, "An unprecedented research effort is underway to deal with this major epidemic public health threat." Based on the research of the French Institut Pasteur and later the National Cancer Institute, citizens learned AIDS was a blood-based disease transmitted through sharing needles, blood transfusions, and oral, vaginal, or anal sex. Nearly everyone who was sexually active was at risk. Some Christian conservatives looked at AIDS as a holy backlash to the open-minded sex culture of the 70s. "AIDS is not just God's punishment for homosexuals," said Pastor Jerry Falwell. "It is God's punishment for the society that tolerates homosexuals." A popular later parody commercial suggested that if you sleep with a woman, you're also sleeping with her previous partners, and her previous partner's partners, and so on and so on, and the television screen would fill up with faces and squares like the Brady Bunch credit sequence gone mad. In the 1960s, when the birth control pill and IUD became readily available, the condom was practically rendered obsolete. Good girls just did it, and penicillin prevailed, notes sexpert Dr. Ava Candell. It wasn't until the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s that condom use regained its prominence. A report in the American Journal of Public Health found that condom sales rose from 240 million in 1986 to nearly 300 million in 1988, the biggest jump happening after Surgeon General C. Everett Koop's 1987 report on AIDS. Trojan, Durex, and other manufacturers used machines, robotic arms, and detached metal phalli to stretch test condoms for durability and leaks. New technology allowed people to connect physically as well as by the bits and bytes in the computer. Richard Bartel and Roy Chubshaw, 2 University of Essex students, created a computer game called Multi-User Dungeon, or MUD. A text-only adventure, MUD would give you a description of the room you're in, the objects in it, and the fellow players around. British undergrads were inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, the American pen and paper fantasy game where players would go on elaborate journeys. In D&D, an appointed leader, called the Dungeon Master, would establish the rules and direct the heroes. Bartel and Trubshaw wanted the Dungeon Masters to be MUD players too. Thousands of individual gamers used their university computers to play together, sometimes calling or even traveling to meet each other in person. One player, Sue the Witch, became one of the most popular MUD adventurers, spending up to 6 hours online a night and racking up a 1,000 British pound phone bill every month. She also stood out as one of the few female players. Despite requests and her obvious commitment to the game, Sue refused to meet with others. She said she was agoraphobic, but would mail pictures of herself and talk with her MUD friends on the phone. One day, Sue sent a terse message saying she was going to take a break for a while. According to the book Dungeons and Dreamers, a group of players discovered Sue's address in England and decided to surprise her with a visit. A woman answered their knock at the door and gave them the bad news. Sue's real name was actually Steve. He'd been playing as a woman since the beginning, letting his wife, whose real name was Sue, answer the phone calls. Steve announced his break just before he was sent away to prison for defrauding a government agency. Another Mud alumnus, Neil Newell, created the computer game Shades. Newell wanted a world larger than Mud. Shades would have more than 500 rooms. He also wanted players to have privacy. In Mud and other games, the admin, short for administrator, would be privy to every action. Confide with an online friend about your marriage problems, and admin would hear the whole conversation. For Shades, Newell made, quote, safe areas, neutral zones where there would be no fighting and complete privacy for the people inside. I'd say the cybersex emerged on Shades simply because it was the first game that gave players guaranteed private areas, Newell says in Sex and Video Games. Naively, I figured people were hanging out in the safe areas for private chat. Cybering, hooking up with people online, wasn't a well-known phenomenon back then. There are other channels for intimate conversations. Bulletin board systems, or BBSs, allowed users to have private chats. You'd call a certain number with your computer modem and exchange messages, not unlike an early form of email. You could also download files, which made BBSs a precursor to internet pornography. Since it was a game, Shades was more user-friendly than the average BBS. It was one of the first titles, if not the first title, to allow cybersex within its boundaries. Journalist Julian DeBell later discussed the unique Mud dynamics in his Village Voice article, A Rape in Cyberspace, observing players' reactions to a virtual public sexual assault. In the game, Lambda Mu. And then there was what I call the techno-libertarians. For them, Mud rapists were, of course, assholes, but the presence of assholes on the system was a technical inevitability, like noise on the phone line, he said. Like Mud and Shades, Lambda Mu was a text-only game. Game players and programmers have had university connections to use expensive computers, but advances in technology brought systems like the Apple II, the IBM PC, and the Atari 800 into people's homes. $2,000 got you a computer almost as powerful as yesterday's bulky university mainframe. Unlike the Atari 2600 and other video game consoles, you could tell the computer what to do, learn a programming language, and teach it to do a balanced spreadsheet, play a musical note, or display a picture. It also democratized who could make games, the equivalent of affordable cameras unleashing more independent filmmakers. For instance, a teenager named Richard Garrett programmed a homemade adventure game, Akalabeth, World of Doom, stuffed copies into Ziploc bags, and sold them, with the help of a small local distributor, to other Apple II users. In the first year, he made $150,000. He started Origin, one of the first major computer game companies, and later sold it to Electronic Arts for $30 million. Origin was one of several small gaming companies that will become heavyweights in the future. Another game creator, IBM engineer Arthur Walsh, learned programming when his manager started writing for the popular computer magazine Byte. Walsh tried teaching his computer to play bridge. It worked, and the success got Walsh hooked on making games. Wanting to one-up Walsh, his supervisor decided to make a flight simulator, which also became a decent game. After a few homemade projects, the two employees decided to leave IBM and start a game company. Walsh had been with IBM for more than 25 years. Shortly after leaving, the two colleagues had a disagreement over the direction of the company, and Walsh decided to start his own venture, Artworks. The new three-person team acquired a few different Atari 800 games, including Walsh's bridge title and a solid but somewhat boring poker game programmed by an outside contractor. There were more poker players than bridge players out there, so we thought, why don't we push poker? One of my associates said, making a joke, I bet if it was strip poker, it would sell. I was like, you're right. Why can't we do that? It was the birth of an idea, Walsh said in an interview. He decided strip poker, a sizzling game of chance, wasn't going to be an erotic game, but instead feature funny, cartoon-inspired characters so it wouldn't offend purchasers of other artwork software. The company artists, however, vehemently disagreed, as did the third employee, and convinced Walsh that they should make the game as realistic as possible. The Atari 800 had a resolution of 320 pixels across and 192 pixels down, less than half of the pocket-sized iPad Nano, and was capable of 4 colors at a time. Artworks artists would have obtained real photographs, develop them onto slides, and project them onto the outside of the computer monitor. The third employee created a drawing program especially for strip poker. Guided by these slides, they would copy each image into the game pixel by pixel. The one aspect Artworks didn't handle was the photography itself, which was done by an outside contractor. Our photographer wasn't a fashion one, but he was good at photographing women. He would find a good place, a hotel or something, and take pictures of them in the bed or in the bathroom. Later, he would make sure the hotel had a jacuzzi because in the final nude scene, the modesty scene, we call it, the woman would be completely nude except for some bubbles, Walsh said. In the final game, the background would be pitch black and opponents would lay horizontally from left to right as they sprawled atop a fireplace-worn bearskin rug. One woman would wear thigh-hugging hot pants and a low-cut polo shirt, her long blonde tresses tumbling past her ample cleavage. The 4 opponents would have 6 different poses, the number of successful poker hands it takes to get to a modesty scene, and 3 different outfits chosen at random. Artworks also sold expansion packs called Data Disc that added 24 opponents. 2 of them were male. It was probably radical at the time, Walsh said. We had women on staff, so I talked to them when we were developing this to see what they thought of having male opponents. But from an appearance standpoint, it was important. We wanted to be even-handed. And obviously, if there was a demand, we wanted to appeal to the demand. Strip Poker, a sizzling game of chance, was released on the Atari 800 in 1982. The Atari version became quite popular. Then it went to Apple, then the original PC when it came out, Walsh said. As far as competition, anytime you've got something that sells, other companies will say, we can do it too. Clones include CoverGirl Poker and Samantha Fox Strip Poker, the latter featuring the popular adult film star. But the competition forced Artworks to take risks. In order to make use of the photos, we'd have the player go against both a male and female opponent in the same game. We also did it with 2 women at the same time, Walsh said, adding, the multi-opponent ones were very popular. We've also seen it used by a spouse. A husband uses as an excuse to buy because he's buying it for his wife, unquote. Just prior to Strip Poker hitting the shelves, Time magazine featured an article on Online Systems, a small company run by a husband and wife team, Ken and Roberta Williams, and its adult text game, Soft Porn Adventure. Online, a California software company sells a program called Soft Porn for $29.25. In the company fantasy game, players seek to seduce 3 women while avoiding hazards, such as getting killed by a bouncer at a disco. Time actually showed the box art along with the article. It features 3 nude women in an outdoor jacuzzi, the bubbling hot water rising just high enough to cover their nipples. They are sipping from champagne glasses, and a waiter with a jet black helmet of hair stands awkwardly behind them. In the background, next to the waiter, partially obscured by the second woman's hairdo, is the Apple II. Online Systems had done a big advertising campaign in major computer magazines like Soft Talk, using the unchanged box art as the ad. I got a copy of Soft Porn as soon as I got my Apple II. Hell, everyone had a copy of Soft Porn. You think it was packaged with Apple II, said 80s game designer Al Lowe. Lowe would soon be working for the nude woman in the far right of the Soft Porn ad. The blonde with the baby face was Online System co-owner Roberta Williams. Lowe began programming when he bought his first home computer, an Apple II with 48K RAM, a 9-inch green screen, and 2 120K floppy drives, and a state-of-the-art Epson MX80 printer, which costs $3,500. A music teacher, Lowe convinced himself the computer would help him with work, even creating a simple program to organize his class schedules. But he really got the system so he and his son could play games together. The first games he bought were the adventure Cranston Manor and the Pac-Man clone Gobbler, both by Online Systems. Lowe became more serious about the Apple II when he went to a music convention and stayed around for a computer convention. The music convention had been pretty much the same old stuff I'd known and seen, kind of all the same things over again. Whereas the next week's show was so exciting and so full of new technologies, Lowe said. He happened to mention his homemade schedule program to one of the vendors. The publisher offered him a deal. Lowe went back home and perfected the program, just in time for the publisher to go out of business. In a last-ditch effort, Lowe and his wife went to AppleFest 82, a popular conference that summer, and purchased a 10-foot by 10-foot booth with a month's income combined. I'm there, and down the hall comes Online Systems co-owner Ken Williams, and as usual he was antsy, walking around the booths to see what was new. And he gets to our booth, stops, and yells, "Hey, Berta, these games look just like yours." Ken and Roberta were impressed by the software and asked him to come by the Online Systems booth first thing in the morning to talk about a publishing deal. Lowe would make the software. Online would distribute it. Within a year, Lowe quit teaching music and became a full-time game designer for Online Systems. An up-and-coming company moved to the mountainous region of California and renamed themselves Sierra Online. When Lowe came aboard, Sierra Online had just successfully negotiated the use of Disney characters in their games, provided it dropped the best-selling soft porn adventure from its catalog. Lowe became instrumental in bringing the wholesome characters to the Apple II, creating graphics, music, and level design to products like Donald Duck's Playground and Winnie the Pooh in the 100-Acre Woods. Sierra Online had also invested a significant amount of money into developing Atari 2600 software and, as a result of the 1983 video game crash, ended up laying off 2/3 of its staff. Ken Williams asked Lowe to leave his full-time programmer post to become a consultant, a work-for-hire employee who would be paid in advance up front against royalties for each product he was involved in. He shows me the advance, and it's like double the money I was making before. So I said yes. And then, as I start to walk away, I ask, "Have I just been fired?" Ken says yes. And I say, "Oh, okay." I remained an outside contractor for the next 15 years. Not unlike Disney's standard employee contract, Lowe's new agreement meant that he wouldn't have much, if any, say in how his characters or creations were used. Any requested feedback would be a courtesy. Sierra Online's Disney license expired in 1986. Ken Williams recommended the company look at updating Soft Porn Adventure, the 1981 title that sold approximately 25,000 copies at a time when there were only 100,000 Apple IIs. Lowe excitedly went home, dusted off his Apple II, and played the game. I was appalled. It was literally a game about a guy getting laid. It had no protagonist, little to no plot, almost no text, understood almost no input. So I reported back to Ken. There's no way I could bring this game into the 80s unless he let me make it fun of that lifestyle. He said it's so behind the times and might as well be wearing a leisure suit. And everyone laughed. Thus was born Leisure Suit Larry. Lowe was in his late 30s, happily married to his wife, Margaret. The two music teachers had a son and a daughter, Brian and Megan, who would both end up happily married as well. Lowe had never been to a strip club. Larry is the anti-Al, he later admitted. There's not much of Larry in me. That's why I could make fun of him in the game. It was sincere. Lowe determined that Larry would be a 30-year-old loser wandering the streets of lost wages, equipped with only a permanent erection. Wearing a tight white suit with a butterfly collar, Larry represented an era of key parties, unprotected sex, and orgy-friendly bathhouses. Larry was a living relic. Lowe didn't think much of soft porn adventure, with its lack of storyline and narrow scope, but the puzzles in soft porn were smart, very old school. It reminded him of the late 70s text adventures like Scott Adams' Adventure or Willie Crowther's seminal Colossal Cave, games with thoughtful, occasionally frustrated situations, but puzzles that were always solvable and often brilliant in hindsight. Like the beginning of soft porn adventure, Larry would start in front of a dive bar called Lefty's. There would be no instructions on what to do next. Making any type of progress in the game required unconventional forethought. For instance, when you receive a cocktail from Lefty's grimy bartender, your first instinct is to drink it. Instead, if you take the drink and give it to the homeless man laying in the bar's back alley, he'll tell you the secret password to entering a neighborhood speakeasy where a lady and her pimp is waiting for you. If players outsmarted the game, outsmarted Lowe, they would be rewarded with sex. Lowe even managed to turn sex into a puzzle. In one case, Larry will die if he has sex without using a condom found in the previous area. The actual act was more implied than explicit. When Larry does finally get laid, the naked scene is covered with a big black censored bar that moves and stretches around the couple like an accordion. Every adventure game was swords and sandals or save the galaxy from these aliens. I thought, I can't do another space game. I can't do another King's Quest game. I wanted something the average guy can relate to, Lowe said. Lowe spent winter 1986 working from home, dedicating his time to perfecting Leisure Suit Larry's in-game puzzles. If he found one hilarious, he would often redo the puzzle to make it funnier. After months of revisions, Lowe put a notice on CompuServe, one of the first online service providers. Lowe said that he and Ken were looking for 10 people to test the new Sierra game for bugs and, more importantly, humor. The response was overwhelming, and also was the first documented time a game company did an official public beta testing. I did it because I wanted the game to be understood as much as I could, Lowe said. Each beta test copy of Leisure Suit Larry had a special file. The program would make a note whenever the player typed in a command it didn't understand. I would go, "Oh, somebody typed that? Oh, okay." I would then create an in-game response to that or create a new puzzle. Each type command, such as open door or have sex, needed to be programmed in. In a sex game, Lowe would have to anticipate everything that the gamer could possibly want to do. Sierra released 2 new adventure games in the summer of 1987, Leisure Suit Larry and the Land of the Lounge Lizards, and the gritty Dirty Harry-inspired cop adventure Police Quest in Pursuit of the Death Angel. Games were usually sold hand-to-hand by eager salespeople, by word of mouth, and by the cover art and text. Soft porn adventure ads notwithstanding, video game advertisements were still in relative infancy. 2 decades later, Grand Theft Auto 3 and other games supported by Hollywood-sized budgets would have commercial spots during The Tonight Show. In 1987, computer game sales methods weren't much different than the Ziploc days. As a result, games that seemed the most familiar were generally the best sellers. Sierra's other top titles, King's Quest III, To Err is Human, and Space Quest II, Val's Revenge, were already part of their respective well-established series. Police Quest was new, but it carried the Quest moniker, had a stylish cover reminiscent of a Clint Eastwood movie. Eastwood's next Dirty Harry movie, The Deadpool, will be out the upcoming summer. The cover of Leisure Suit Larry had the hero with his pickle nose, oversized head, and butterfly collared shirt, sipping a martini and leaning against the TV displaying a naked digital woman in a jacuzzi, reminiscent of the soft porn ad. Overseas, Palace Software released the action game Barbarian, the Ultimate Warrior. On the cover was a warrior couple played by an unknown male model and Maria Whittaker, a busty page 3 girl. An iconic feature, British tabloids often featured a nude or topless woman on page 3. On the game box, Whittaker had a leather bikini bra, a metallic-looking thong, and a very long sword. Maria Whittaker was a famous page 3 girl who had often been featured on page 3, but when she appeared on the game's cover, clad in far more clothes than usual, with a fancy brassiere and admittedly skimpy thong, a right-to-do ensued. According to the book High Score, The Illustrated History of Electronic Video Games. There was much protest and hoopla over the buxom Miss Whittaker's state of dress on the Barbarian cover, and, this is the ironic part, nothing about the extreme gory violence of the game, which is far more gruesome than just about anything that had been released previously. Unlike soft porn adventure, games like Barbarian, Strip Poker, and Leisure Suit Larry were being sold at major electronic outlets to mainstream audiences, not directly from small home offices to techies. Strip poker was being taken off the shelves, which was in the late 80s through the early 90s, says Artworks Arthur Wash. At Electronics Boutique, we had one of its best selling programs. We were notified that it wasn't going to buy any more of our programs. This letter was from the new vice president of purchasing, who said it was inappropriate for sale. Sierra was in for a similar quandary when Radio Shack and several other outlets refused to carry Leisure Suit Larry. Police Quest and Larry shipped. Police Quest flew out of the stores, but Larry sold like 4,000 copies the first month it was out. This is back when almost all Sierra titles sold 50,000 copies or more per month, Lowe said. It was one of the worst, if not the worst, selling game in Sierra's history. 6 months of hard work gone, Lowe's just immersed himself in other titles, including the next Larry game, Leisure Suit Larry Goes Looking for Love in several wrong places. Did my life change after Larry first came out? Not really, Lowe said. My wife and I had the opinion that the game thing was kind of temporary, so she kept working as a music coordinator. We lived off of her salary. On Monday, October 19th, 1987, the New York Stock Exchange dropped more than 500 points, the equivalent of $500 billion disappearing in one day. It was the worst devaluation in American stock market history. The market was a victim of inflated initial public offerings and overhyped companies. Donald Trump revitalized Atlantic City, becoming a billionaire, and perhaps more importantly, showing that anyone could have the American dream if they were hungry enough. Trump, The Art of the Deal, was the #1 book by the end of the year. Oliver Stone released Wall Street, which popularized the 1987 mantra, greed is good. There were enough aggressive, financially minded high rollers around to create a new term, yuppie, or young urban professional. Buying stock in new future-minded companies was considered a great, fast way to get good return on investment. Many of these new, future-minded companies were filled with hot air. They popped on Black Monday. Newspapers reported seeing broke 20-something Manhattan penthouse owners, their Italian shoes halfway off the window ledge, yelling to the world that they were going to jump. Bobby McFerrin's video to his hit, Don't Worry, Be Happy, parodied the stock market suicides. Investors who wanted to continue to work could not. The world markets were paralyzed by the New York Stock Exchange crash. A Wall Street employee, perhaps a board analyst, perhaps a frustrated broker, uploaded a copy of Leisure Suit Larry in the Land of the Lounge Lizards onto the company's computer server. Several sources claim it was Merrill Lynch. The managers noticed the company's computers were running sluggishly, but other firms had caught on by then. It was too late. Computer games have proved increasingly popular since the fall in trading volumes experienced after the crash of October, and dealers have filled their work hours by playing games, said a London Financial Times article. The adventures of Larry the Lounge Lizard have proved particularly popular because of their salacious content. Those 4,000 copies Leisure Suit Larry sold the first month became 8,000 the next month and 16,000 the next. By February, the soft sell top 10 computer game chart was owned by King Quest III, Police Quest, and Leisure Suit Larry. Lowe had a hand in all of them. Leisure Suit Larry alone would sell more than 300,000 copies. Lowe received a call from Gruber Peters Productions, the company behind the hit Fox company Married with Children. It wanted to do a Larry sitcom. Lowe went down to their offices and set up Leisure Suit Larry in one of the boardrooms. About 20 employees crammed into the room to watch Lowe manipulate Larry on a 36-inch computer monitor. So they would say something, I'd paraphrase it and type it in, and it would mostly work. Like when we went into the bar, went to the bathroom, to the urinals, and someone would say, take a leak. I type it in, and it worked, Lowe recalled. Then some guy yelled, masturbate! Now I'm thinking, I'm not sure if it'll understand. I can't remember if I programmed that in or not. So I type it in, and it came back and said, the whole idea was for you to stop doing that. Everyone cracked up. Other studios approached Lowe about doing a Larry movie, going as far as reading some potential scripts. One wanted to get Jim Carrey, Lowe would later say. He was hot from Dumb and Dumber. He says studios offered horrible scripts, and those that had decent ideas would allow him to play a role in the final product. He says he was offered a considerable amount of money. He turned everything down, wanting to protect his lovable character. Shortly after Leisure Suit Larry shipped, a friend overseas told Lowe his game was a hit in Russia. The problem was Sierra didn't do a Russian version of the game. He later saw it himself. I found one in Moscow for $2, and their CD art was even better than ours. Now, the entire game had been copied, but they couldn't figure out the audio files, so they had re-recorded the voices in Russian, overdubbed it. My first reaction was, we should hire this guy. Lowe's character was becoming an international icon, whether he wanted Larry to be or not. Lowe initially saw the Leisure Suit Larry series as a trilogy. In Leisure Suit Larry 3, Passionate Patty in Pursuit of the Pulsating Pectorals, Larry finally finds his soulmate, Patty, an Aeron that you can control during certain segments of the game, ends up falling out on the backlot of Sierra Productions, an homage to Lowe's favorite comedy, Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles. The game finishes with Larry getting hired by Ken Williams to do a new game for Sierra. I think I'll start a game in Lost Wages, outside of a bar named Lefty's, Larry says, type in the beginning of the first Leisure Suit Larry. Lowe publicly said there would never be a Larry 4. This was before Leisure Suit Larry 3 became the most successful Larry game yet, and before it became obvious that Larry wasn't going to go away. Lowe and Ken Williams had another one of their talks, and decided that instead of breaking up the trilogy, Sierra would put Larry online. It would be called Larryland. We had this room full of modems. We thought it had to be one modem per computer, Lowe said. With the limited bandwidth, we could create a multiplayer game like chess and checkers, but we wanted to do an adventure. There was no nationwide digital infrastructure like broadband or cable hookups that could quickly transfer information from computer to computer to make a complex game playable. 2 Sierra employees, Jeff Stephenson and Matthew George, handled the technical end. And my job? Simple. All I had to do was design the first interactive multiplayer online adventure game, Lowe recalled on his online diary, owllowe.com. Needless to say, I failed. Lowe quit Larryland after 6 difficult months. The infrastructure would eventually become the Sierra Network, an online gaming community that would struggle to make profit in upcoming years. Shortly after Larryland failed, the company Quantum released a sophisticated BBS program for the Macintosh. Unlike its competitors, Quantum wanted to provide internet access and services to people new to computers. The dominant company at the time, CompuServe, was made by techies for techies. For example, CompuServe email addresses were composed of assigned, seemingly randomly numbers and letters. The Quantum service would have easy-to-use chat rooms, colorful graphics, and online games. The company already had some success with its previous BBS program, Quantum Link, for the Commodore line of computers. Quantum would release the Mac version under a new name, America Online. In a few years, it would surpass CompuServe, Prodigy, and other service providers. AOL would eventually purchase the Sierra network, shutting it down shortly after. Despite the Larryland setback, fans continued to ask Lowe when Leisure Suit Larry was coming back. "Are you still working on Larry 4? A coworker asked him one day. "No," he says, "I'm working on Larry 5. He pauses after his wise-ass comment and realizes he's onto something. Lowe began to work on Leisure Suit Larry 5. Passionate Patty does a little undercover work, which would also go on to sell 300,000 copies. The sequel will make references to events that happened in Larry 4. Game events that, of course, never occurred.